Mistborn: The Final Empire, a famous book written by Brandon Sanderson back in 2007. Despite all the praise that this book gives, I think often its downsides tends to be neglected, which is why I've decided to make a review on this book. I read it a while back and I've recently jogged my mind through the story. I thought it was important for me to get a review out there because I think for all that I love this book, I think it is also important to make sure that the faults of it aren't neglected, because there are definitely faults in this book that I think should be addressed. So first off, we're going to start off with a non-spoiler review, and then we're going to go to a spoiler section where we're going to go a bit more in depth into what I liked and what I disliked. But we're going to start out with a non-spoiler review. So first off, we're going to talk about the things that I actually really enjoyed about Mistborn, because I really enjoyed this book in general. I think the character writing for Vin, the main character, is great. I love Vin. I think that she is very well written, and I think that the angle of kind of following Vin in Kelsier's story is basically what we do here in the first book. I think is a very interesting take, and I think Kelsier, though slightly unoriginal, is still a very interesting character and a great fit for Vin as a mentor. Although I definitely think that Vin is the stronger character, without a doubt the strongest character in this book, and preferably in a book you'd actually want your main character to be the strongest character, although it is a bit sad that some of the characters lag a bit behind, especially a lot of the side characters don't get enough attention, I'd say, and are basically just there to kind of fill in this kind of story tropes of the old grumpy guy and the fun, very elegant dude and stuff like that, and doesn't really, very two-dimensional characters in general, and doesn't really move beyond that. And I think that's a bit sad that Mistborn doesn't do that. I also think that the prose in Mistborn is something that could be very much improved upon. I think Brandon Sanderson gets away with his very utilitarian prose in the Stormlight Archive series, but he is not as well-versed an author in the Mistborn, and that much is pretty obvious. His prose is not as good and very oftentimes lessens the story. I think definitely his prose could be improved upon, although I don't think his style of simplicity and of clear window presentation style is inherently wrong. I still think that the overall prose of Mistborn is nothing special. With regards to the pacing, I also have a lot of issues. The pacing in Mistborn is kind of all over the place. Especially in the beginning, it's very slow, and then picks up speed a bit. And then there's also a point at the start of the third arc that I thought came out of nowhere. Kind of felt like Brandon didn't really know how to start the third arc, and just said, I'm just gonna make it happen, and then hopefully it'll go over as a realistic third arc. His book does pick up and slow down at the beginning of the third arc. It kind of just takes off all of a sudden, and I think that is a shame. I do think though that the moral maturity that Mistborn has is very well done. It does a great job showing a very realistic, sophisticated view of society without directly painting anyone in a given societal group as bad or inherently evil, but more so that the general system is flawed. There are people both within the group of nobles and the Ska that are both bad and good people, and I think the moral maturity in general to kind of write this kind of gray area for some characters as well. For Kelsier, I think is very interesting, and I think is very well done. For another praise I definitely have for the Mistborn, that is the world building and the magic system, particularly the magic system. In general, I think the world building for what it is pretty good, but the story largely takes place in one city, with a few visits to another city, but the story tries to portray, I'd say, the world larger than it really is in the book. We're given a map at the beginning of the book of all sorts of locations and stuff like that, and we barely visit any of them throughout the story. It kind of felt like it was just put on back burner, whereas Brandon just focused on writing out Luthadel and all the structures within that given city. Doesn't really feel like a whole complete world, but still for what it gives is great. And then I think the magic system is incredible. It's a hard magic system. It's very well written and well thought out. That gives a lot of space for character ingenuity and for the characters to kind of solve problems with the magic without it seeming like a deus ex machina, but more like the characters are kind of solving puzzles with the magic that they're given. And I think the magic system in general leaves a lot of room for that. So I really enjoyed that. And I think in general, The Mistborn, The Final Empire is an incredible book. I'm gonna give it 8 out of 10 stars. I loved the book. If you haven't read it, I definitely recommend you to go read it, but I still thought it was important to kind of address the things that I think are often neglected because people love the book so much. Now we'll go ahead into the spoiler section where I'll go more into detail about the things I liked and the things I disliked. The trouble that this story has is that Brandon is very good at writing characters, but I think, especially here in the Final Empire, he doesn't devote a lot of time to characters outside of Vin. I think Sazed and Kelsier are, they manage to not be two-dimensional characters, but still don't live up to the potential that they kind of reach in the later books. And I think that's a shame. I think the only one that really goes through a solid story arc in this book is Vin. The crew in general, Breeze, Hammond, Dachshund, are kind of just put there as a symbol for the theme of the Mistborn trilogy in general and for Vin's growth. I think they're kind of representative of what she needs and what the trust that she has to the family that she finds within the story. They're more there to represent that fact than to be characters in and of themselves, which I think is a shame. With regards to Vin, I think her story arc of focusing on survival at the beginning and focusing on kind of being small whenever people approach her, pretending like she's nothing and like trying to avoid getting hurt. We see that especially in the beginning, where when Kelsier takes her in, they kind of develop slowly a relationship of trust that she's never had before. Is even reinforced throughout the story by her elder brother's words that keep going through her head. He always told her that she couldn't trust anyone and that she shouldn't even trust him, which then ended up being true in this case, because he then walked out and disappeared on her. Her older brother Reen kind of represents that struggle that she has with trust, and I think that definitely changes throughout the story. First off, developing a kind of teacher-student relationship with Kelsier, and eventually it turns out her whole focus is kind of built around the crew in the end. Like, her relationship with Kelsier is also what motivates her to go after the Lord Ruler at the end as kind of a revenge story, because she ended up caring about Kelsier so much, which is not something she would have done at the beginning of the story, because she was very self-centered back then and she didn't really have anything that she wanted to get revenge for. And I think that's a great story arc, and I think it is very well represented, and I think also displaying thought processes of characters. I think he's very good at that. A lot of books, they tend to be like, oh, they came up with this idea, but they don't really show the introspection process that leads to this idea. And then we also have Kelsier, who's kind of the stereotypical charismatic savior type character, but still is very well written, I'd say. He snaps in the pits of Hathsin after his wife is killed, and then goes from being this selfish thief that we were told he was in the beginning, and then goes to be this kind of revolutionary rebel figure that then eventually ends up being revered by the rest of the Ska. And although it is a bit, it's a bit of not a wholly original route for him to take, it was very well done. Sazed was also great as a secondary kind of mentor, but very different from Kelsier also. If you took out the Kelsier and the Sazed character, the crew kind of relation wouldn't work at all in this story. Then we have also Elend. He's not exactly two-dimensional, but he doesn't have a lot to do in this story. He basically just represents the further development that Vin gets with a more sophisticated view on the nobles, whereas we even see the flaws Kelsier has with his direct hate towards the nobles, that he also ends up kind of developing at the end. Just before he dies, he chooses to save Elend, which is also, I guess, kind of a character development, but, there weren't put a lot of time in it, but I think kind of still adds, the necessary quirks to Kelsier's character to make him believable. One thing I did think was disappointing about the story was, as I mentioned earlier, the pacing. Right after their rebel army that they were building up failed as a result of overconfidence, the overconfidence that Kelsier had infused them with, the third act just kind of starts with the Lord Ruler arranging the executions, and then the Kelsier just suddenly snaps and goes like, I can't take it anymore. Now we're gonna fight. I thought that could have been better handled. And I also think, you know, the beginning was a bit slow. You know, I've seen interviews with Brandon. He wanted to kind of do the heist thing, but I just don't think it works really for this kind of story. And it's just really a quirk that he puts into Mistborn to kind of make it stand out. But in the end, the heist doesn't really play a role, and it just ends up being the standard overthrow the Empire type story, even though it kind of tries to be a heist all the way until the rebel army kind of fails. And yeah, as I said, I really enjoyed this book. I just thought it was important to kind of address the things that people often tend to neglect, and it is so great that the good kind of tends to overshadow the critiques that you could have, and then you end up forgetting to talk about, you know, oh, what problems does the story actually have? Even though I love Mistborn, I think it was still important to address and to get a more kind of nuanced review in. So yeah, this was my review of Mistborn, The Final Empire. Let me know what you thought. I hope you enjoyed the video, and let me know if you want me to do a review of the 2 other Mistborn books, because I definitely, you know, I thought they were interesting, great books, and yeah. So guys, if you loved this video, go check out 2 of my other videos right here, and support me if you love my content. I would really appreciate it, and you know, have a good one, guys. Peace.